The proceeding.
Order. Welcome to this morning's session of the House of Commons Select Committee on Business and Trade, when we begin our first evidence session for our inquiry on export-led growth. I'm delighted that the committee has this morning, during private business, agreed its report on the Post Office that will be published without embargo on Thursday morning, and we can now begin our evidence session. So thank you so much to our witnesses for joining us this morning. William, perhaps I could start with you. We've had a number of targets over the last 8 to 9 years to hit £1 trillion in exports by 2030. Secretary of State not 100% in the same place as the OBR, but that's the business we're in. But I wonder if you could give us your view on whether you think actually having that £1 trillion export target is useful, and whether you think it's achievable.
It is useful for the UK to have clear targets for exports, and also how those will link with other key policies, for example, industrial policy and foreign policy, as well as security and defence increasingly. I think the danger of simply having one target is that it does not reflect, I think, the sort of panoply of areas in which we're trading. So, for example, there's no target around services, and yet even compared with 10 years ago, our services growth is expanding at a good rate, 5.3% last year in terms of chain volumes. So that is a real success story. The 1 trillion target doesn't have a sort of category within it in terms of increasing green trade either. So I think it is useful to have, but it is not sufficient to reflect the panoply of activity which businesses are seeking to engage in to increase their export capacity.
And on current trends, or on current information, how confident are you that we'll reach that target?
Doesn't look like we'll reach it by the end of the decade. It is going to be well into the next decade.
Well into the next decade?
Yes. Depends where, obviously, inflation goes, and whether you sort of take out the effects of inflation in terms of looking at whether government and business have met that target. So there are clearly extra efforts going to be needed if we're going to bring forward the date by which we get to that 1 trillion level.
I see. Okay. Kate Foster, what's your view? Is it a useful thing to have that target, and how do you feel about us actually hitting the number?
I would agree it is useful to have a target, but I think, like William, that the current target doesn't reflect accurately the nuances, particularly when you're looking at trade and exporting within the UK small business community. We know from speaking to our members that small business exports are generally relatively low value, low volume. HMRC data reported that in 2020, businesses with over 250 employees were approximately 2.5% of the number of UK exporters, but represented over half of the value of goods exported. So when we have an overall value target, I think we risk not sufficiently looking at increasing the number of small businesses who might be curious about exporting but not quite know how to start, or not have sufficient resources to be able to take that first step. We're also missing an opportunity to increase the proportion of an SME's sales that come from exports, because our data shows that around 2/3 of businesses exporting, businesses within FSB membership, say that exports accounts for less than 25% of their total sales. So there is a real opportunity to increase that.
Would you prefer to include a target for small business exports?
I think that would be useful, yes. I think it's important.
Would that be an easy thing to calculate? Would that be an easy thing to establish, do you think, or not?
Previous FSB data has suggested, and this was pre EU exit, that there was the potential to double the number of UK exporter SMEs. I would suggest that that number is maybe lower now, given struggling with cost pressures from all sides. But I think a target to increase by a certain percent the number of SMEs that are exporting would be useful.
What's the value to SMEs of exporting? Obviously, it's extra sales, but does it do anything for their general strength and competitiveness?
It does. SMEs that export are generally more likely to grow quicker. Mm-hmm. They are more likely to be resilient in the face of economic disruption as well.
Okay, that's really useful. Nick, what's your view?
Well, I'd agree that a target is a good thing, better than not having a target, because I think it not only provides a basis for ambition to grow exports, and I agree with Kate's point about the benefits of that for domestic businesses. So a lot of agri-food businesses are small businesses, and we see the benefit in growing exports, in particular where there is a very, very competitive domestic sector, retail sector, as there is in the UK, just to add a little bit more competition to that. I think, again, echoing what Kate said, one of the challenges with having a target, however, is it's quite simplistic, and we see in agri-food, for example, quite a variation in export performance and export potential across different sectors. Actually, I think if you look at export growth in agri-food prior to 2019, prior to the pandemic and other factors, it was over 6% a year, and I sit on the Food and Drink Export Council as well as representing NFU, and we've looked at how agri-food contributes to that race to $1 trillion.
Would you prefer, within, say, £1 trillion export target, would you prefer to have a supplementary target that is around agribusinesses, for example?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, why not? And even looking at it more granularly than that, I think because there are differences in different sectors, and also the potential for large businesses in commodities to grow quite quickly, whereas I think what we see as beneficial domestically is focusing also perhaps even more on smaller businesses in more specialised high-value products, not solely, but there is a benefit there. Getting growth and hitting that target is going to be more difficult if that's where your focus is, but there is a benefit on focusing on those parts of the economy.
John, want to just round out the panel?
Thank you very much.
Good idea.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think I agree pretty much with the other speakers. I mean, in terms of any policy, it's useful to have targets and outcomes that are expected from the policy, but of course a simple global figure doesn't really mean much by itself. I would expect that if the government is to give form to the strategy for this, one would need to look, for instance, at how specific subsectors among UK exports can be increased. I mean, last year, for instance, in 2023, UK exports, I think for almost the first time, UK exports of services exceeded UK exports of goods. They represented 54% of exports. Now, within that, financial and related professional services, my area, I ought to have the figure for how much is accounted for by that, but I don't. I can send it to you. But clearly, if the strategy is to lead to a particular figure, then the strategy has to be reflected in subsidiary targets and also subsidiary activities by individual parts of government, including regulators, to be attuned to achieving that export target.
Okay. And do you have a feeling as to whether that £1 trillion export target will be met?
No, I don't have a feeling. I ought to confess. I haven't looked at that.
Nick, do you have a sense of whether the...
Not that total. I mean, I could, as I say, the food and drink aspect of it, I think it would need to be a growth of about 5%, a little bit under a year. That is certainly possible in food and drink, but I mean, that's 5% of total exports of goods and services. So whether that gets us near to $1 trillion is...
William and Kate, your view is we're probably not going to hit that target as things stand. Okay, perfect. Right, thank you very much. Henry McDonald.
Thanks, Chair. If I could perhaps first ask William and then perhaps John about this, because we've seen that the Department for International Trade published a report of research it commissioned on barriers to exporting by UK businesses, and they listed a few things: attitudinal barriers, trade costs, lack of knowledge, perceived or lack of capacity, limited access to contacts or the right networks. So the opening question, I think, William, is if to be a successful exporter, what are the key steps that a business has to take to achieve that, given that framing?
Thanks, Mr. McDonald. I'd say the first thing is you have to have a sense that you want to export. So companies have to feel that it's for them. And often with small and micro businesses, this can be the first hurdle to get over. So having really effective peer-to-peer support locally. I look at some of the brilliant examples across the country. Lincolnshire Chamber, for example, has a magnificent scheme which brings together companies that haven't exported before, gets them interested in it, they take them through that journey together, and they also look at the markets that they might want to take their goods into. So that is a really great scheme, and there are others across the country as well. I think it's a recognition, Mr. McDonald, you can have a national priority that we want to get more micro and small and medium-sized businesses exporting, but the delivery of that is best done at a local level. And, you know, it is organisations like Chambers of Commerce that have the knowledge of companies in their area, the expertise, can form the networks, and much more use could be made by government of that in terms of delivery of some of the points within the overall export strategy.
But those models surely would have to change from region to region, sector to sector, because Lincolnshire wouldn't be reflective of my particular area. So how do you tap into those sorts of expertise and making sure you've got something that's relevant and applicable? Because my own evidence of constituency MP, that's sometimes been a little bit lacking, to say the least.
Well, we had an excellent trade facilitation forum of the whole network in Birmingham last week. And again, you can see common approaches. It's using that local knowledge and know-how, tailoring it to companies within the boundaries of each chamber, but looking to make the most of the opportunities, whether it's from, you know, the key trade deals that we have, exports to the States. Training, I think we're seeing options developed by the Chambers network on some of the key regulatory barriers like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which are quite innovative, are better than anything else that's been provided on the market. So I think for government to sort of lean a bit more into seeing that initiative and delivery being done best at a local level, instead of trying to nationalise the delivery, I think is going to be a better outcome, because it's really about getting companies that have perhaps low capacity to start that export journey, maybe not the staffing levels, to get them that support and training and advice, and most importantly, the market for their goods and services. That's the key thing.
Okay. John, could I come to you to ask you to comment on this, whether you think that summarises the position? I mean, we talk about attitudinal barriers, but is there anything else that we can do, not just in that respect, but in terms of the lack of knowledge that companies may have in actually breaking into markets and exporting?
Well, I think the answer varies very much with the scale of the business one is talking about, and whether it is a newcomer to the whole idea of exporting, as William has said. I mean, at that level, there is an attitudinal problem to be taken into account, and also I think a kind of market gap problem, that there may be simply be, as he has said, lack of knowledge of what opportunities there might be abroad and what might be the market for a business's trade and goods or services. I think for the CityUK in my area of financial and professional services, we're probably in a rather different place, to be frank. I mean, these are large businesses which are either in London or in some other major business capital across the UK. It might be Edinburgh, it might be Manchester, it might be Leeds, but that's where they are. I don't think they need any training in attitudes and the wish to export, because they're already in a highly internationally competitive sector. What they may need, and one looks, for instance, at some of the government's particular areas like fintech bridges with particular markets, what they may need is, if, say, you have a small fintech that's eager to export, do the fintech bridge arrangements provide enough to enable that business to scale up, or could more be done in those areas? So I don't think it's a question of attitude, but it may be a question in quite specific areas where these big companies that could already comply with all the regulatory requirements may need help in certain areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Whether Nick or Kate want to add anything to this?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, as I mentioned, lots of actors in the agri-food sector are obviously small businesses, and capability and barriers, those sorts of issues are big issues when it comes to improving our export performance. And you can look at it, there's a sort of two aspects. There's those companies that are already doing some exporting, but what are the barriers to those increasing the amount of exporting they're doing? Often those are regulatory. There are issues with entering new markets. They may be familiar with what they have to do for some markets, but the requirements into other markets will be very different. And obviously agri-food is very regulated. There may just be tariff barriers in those markets, and they may not have market intelligence on what the opportunities are. So all of that can be improved. But there's also obviously those companies who are not exporting at all, and trying to reach out to them to provide the information. William talked about peer-to-peer programs. That's something we think will be very important in the agri-food sector, and there is some work ongoing in improving that at the moment, and some events being set up by the Food and Drink Export Council. Those are all important as well, but it really is multifaceted. These barriers exist in a number of areas, and all of those need to be overcome.
I would agree with a lot of what has already been said. Attitudinal issues are definitely important. For the vast majority of our members who export, we would describe them as passive exporters. Only a third of FSB exporters build international trade explicitly into their growth strategy. For most of our members, if they export, it's because somebody has found their product online, they've found their website, it's in response to a direct approach from a potential customer. So the feeling that William mentioned of making sure that businesses, micro and small businesses particularly, feel that exporting is for them is really important. The knowledge cost of investing time and resources into understanding how to start exporting, but also getting to know new markets, is very significant for businesses that don't have teams. They don't have often even a dedicated person to dealing with exports. They are doing this on top of everything else. So being able to support businesses to find out about new markets, get into new markets, to make visits and visit potential customers is really important, in addition to all of the knowledge that we've spoken about.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to come on to support for businesses, so can I park that bit for the moment? Nick, the NFU said that the barriers or key barriers to exporting were tariffs, access to tariff rate quotas, technical barriers to trade, market intelligence, domestic infrastructure, and obviously what you've said already. How do we overcome these?
Unfortunately, money is a part of it. Actually, the government have over the last 2 years brought forward some very welcome measures to improve things. So, for example, we used to have 2 agricultural attachés overseas. Whereas, if you look at others, I think Netherlands have 35, Australia have 25. This is a pretty standard practice for countries that want to do well in terms of agri-food exports. We had 2. We now have 16. We had 5 announced recently when we had 11. So by the end of this year, we should have 16 placed in overseas embassies. It's a really good thing. We've already seen some of the results of that. We've started exporting lamb back into the USA, for example, after over 20 years being unable to do that. And a lot of that was unlocked by having dedicated support on the ground in the embassies, talking to US businesses and the US government to do that. So that sort of resource is really important, and if we can have more, even better. But the other aspect of this is about market intelligence, promotion, those things I spoke about. What the attachés can do is the technical regulatory unlocking, but actually if you want the market intelligence, a lot of that is delivered at the moment by the AHDB, the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. All of that money is levy payer money, i.e. it's farmers' money. There is very little government matched funding for that at all. It's only about 6 million, I think, at the moment, a bit more. The levy payers' money is spent on that. If the government match funded that would be very useful. But if you look at, say, Bord Beer in Ireland, their budget is about 75 million euros. 80% of that is government funded. The US have just announced a package of $200 million on export support for their agri-food sectors. So what we're doing here is still pretty dwarfed by that. I understand money is tight and there's lots of issues there, but unfortunately that's what's needed. And if we're serious about it, then that's what's needed.
You've just given an example of a improvement in the sale of lamb to America. We don't have a free trade agreement with them. I just wonder if you want to make a comment on whether or not free trade agreements are helping improve the problems that you're facing, and I'll just come back to the money thing after you've answered that.
Yeah, FTAs are, they're not unimportant, but as you've just alluded to there, they are not the be-all and end-all by any means. You can do a lot of what's needed to improve exports or even open up exports happens outside of FTAs. FTAs largely reduce tariffs. But you can have an FTA with somebody and still be unable to export because you don't have an export health certificate for an animal product, for example. There might be other non-tariff barriers. So the work that goes on outside of FTAs or on top of FTAs in terms of those regulatory barriers are really crucial. And it's a really important point. We mustn't assume that doing an FTA is the sort of beginning and the end of opening up exports.
I just want to come to one thing, because you've again mentioned a good example of where other countries provide more funding, both private and public sector, in terms of supporting the agri-food businesses. There's been an interesting conversation I've had with your NFU members in my constituency, which I do on a quarterly basis, where they look at these free trade agreements and they say, it's all very well you saying that we're going to be able to reach new markets, this is terrific, but we can't scale up. We are trying to fulfill a domestic market, which we're not producing enough. So you saying we can sell into these areas isn't really going to make any difference because we won't be able to meet our own domestic demand, let alone the demands of other countries. What's your sort of response to that?
Well, I mean it's right, and I absolutely understand that sentiment. I don't think it has to be one or the other, though. I think we open up the opportunities for export markets that can contribute what we do in the domestic. Complement what we do in the domestic market, but there are clearly some sectors where we are quite large net importers, and actually grabbing a higher proportion of our domestic market is probably the priority, but it really isn't one or the other, particularly if you look at something like carcass balance. So there's lots of products we produce, say a pig, where there is a healthy domestic market for certain parts of that animal, but not for others, the head, the trotters, etc. You need to find export markets for for those sorts of products, and that happens across a lot of other sectors as well.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to just come in on any of those sort of barriers that you're seeing from your side, and whether or not DBT needs to be doing a great deal more to help overcome them? Or has it got to be the private sector?
No, I can speak on that. I mean, the barriers that the financial and related professional services sector face tend to be, I mean, first of all, there's geopolitics generally, which really affects all exporters in one way or another. We have a great many elections this year, including probably our own, and certainly in the United States and also in the European Union, but others too. There's a great emphasis on economic resilience and national security in the way campaigns are run, which tends to have effects. For instance, security of digital trade can be a barrier. We generally face, of course, regulatory complexity, which is a behind the barrier set of issues, which is therefore completely different from those affecting goods in terms of tariffs at the border. We also face the barrier of difficulties over people movement. One can call it migration, but that suggests something much larger than what we're actually concerned with. And in all of those, FTAs can be useful. I mean, they can provide certain guarantees of market access. For instance, the recent UK FTA with Australia had an important provision that financial services providers could continue to run their back offices from their home base. This is an important guarantee when you think of the difficulties there are with UK trade with the European Union in financial services at the moment, when there's always the threat of how far back office services can be permitted to be continued in the UK. So I think there is the other great thing that, of course, FTAs can do is set up and give government impetus to regulatory cooperation and regulatory dialogues, and that, of course, is enormously important for resolving those behind-the-border regulatory issues as they arise.
Businesses understand that, though. I mean, do you get a sense that I understand what you're saying, and I can see why someone in Whitehall who's dealing with another government around the world will see the benefit of that. But do businesses feel as though there's an opportunity here for them? Are they into the details, or is it actually a failure of us to be able to actually explain the proper benefits?
It's frankly hard to tell at this stage of the very few trade agreements other than rollover agreements that the UK has itself negotiated. I mean, if one takes, for instance, the regulatory cooperation provisions, yes, it's good that they're there, and yes, it's good if they result in meetings being held regularly on a timetable with a forecast agenda that also includes the possibility of consulting the private sector on both sides on what the issues are. But of course, such regulatory cooperation arrangements need to be going for a few years before one really can evaluate how good they are, and we haven't yet had a few years.
Back to you. Thank you, Mr. Palsy.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could ask some questions about the government strategy. We know the government set out a strategy in 2018 and they refreshed it in 2021. I want to sort of get an impression from each of you of the value of that strategy. Is there something useful there? Or perhaps if I come to you, William, first, is it just motherhood and apple pie?
No, I think the purpose of the strategy is sound. I think the 12 points within the strategy are fine. I think they do need to be augmented. So, there's no reference really in the strategy to digital trade. And the British Chambers have set a target that by the start of the next decade, we should be doing 60% of our exports by digital means, whether that's services being emailed or sent electronically, or through digital trade assisting the sending of our goods exports to their destination markets. So there's nothing in there about that. There needs to be, clearly, I think, some distinct points around services. We also need to have, some clearer commitments, I'd say, on environmentally sound goods and services too. And also, what the UK's strategy is in terms of market access. As we just heard from John, the officials in DBT are doing a great job day in, day out in knocking out some of these restrictions, doing the legwork both bilaterally with countries and in the World Trade Organization to make things easier for UK businesses to trade. But we need to have more recognition of that in the strategy as well. And as we've discussed earlier, I think we need to have more mini targets within having an overall target, which reflect the sectoral nature of our trade.
Thank you. The notion that we've got an overall figure without understanding which sectors of our economy and which sectors of our businesses are going to cumulatively get to where we want to be is a bit odd as far as I'm concerned. Kate, what's your view on the strategy?
Well, we welcome the strategy as well. I think it's a really useful marker of UK government intentions, and there isn't anything I would say that I would hugely change in the current strategy, but I think there are a few things missing, okay. And there are a couple of things that also need refreshing, given the strategy is now a few years old. Firstly, William's already touched on this: e-commerce and digital trade, paperless trade. It's really important, one, to make best use of the Electronic Trade Documents Act, okay. And actually make sure that processes become less reliant on wet ink signatures and physical copies, because that can cause delays, and helping small businesses develop the right skills to be able to navigate these things.
I was very taken by you when you said that only 1/3 of businesses, SMEs, incorporate into a growth strategy, and they've almost seemed to be exporters by accident rather than design. Is that what you're saying?
That is true.
Okay. Nick, your views on the strategy?
Yeah, well, as I sort of alluded to, I think what's going on in the agri-food space maybe has slightly overtaken the strategy, because we have this Food and Drink Export Council, which was set up in January last year, which is very much focusing obviously on agri-food and drink specifically, and there's quite a lot happening there. The term of that council is up during the summer, so there needs to be some view of what happens in future, and I think it's very, very important work that needs to be continued in one form or another. But there is there are some very interesting discussions and ideas beginning to emerge from that council. So I think actually that for agri-food, in a way, that's where it's at within the Export Council, and I mentioned some of the measures that have come forward already. So there is a sort of strategy emerging for agri-food specifically, which we'd support. Okay,
John, anything you'd like to see in the strategy that's not there, or is it overall helpful?
Well, we welcome the overall strategy, but I can echo in a way what Nick von Westenholz has just said. In the CityUK, we have alongside it, and we continue to develop our own strategy for really restoring the UK to being the leading financial centre in the world, which of course involves its export trade as well as its global position.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I could just ask each of you to comment on what I think is missing, and that's, as a former salesperson, there's nothing there about sales skills. And John, you reminded us that the government goes off and does trade deals, and I think there's a feeling in this place that all we've got to do is do the trade deal and the business will automatically follow. We don't focus on the skills of our salespeople domestically. I mean, nobody who works in sales set out to be a salesperson while they were going through school. Often people drift into sales and they have to be taught sales once they're in post. And I don't know of anybody who's putting a particular effort into identifying the separate sales skills that are needed to sell in export markets. So perhaps could each of you tell me how you think the government could do better about making certain that we've got people with the relevant skills to get at the very fantastic products that are often made in this country and services that we provide sold better in export markets. William, would you like to deal with my rant on sales?
Answer.
Thank you. Well, a starter for 10 in terms of some suggestions. Our view is that there should be a stronger responsibility and set of metrics expected from our embassies and consulates across the world. That they have a more defined responsibility for promoting and finding new customers in that sense, putting together that sort of network of a pipeline for our exporters. So that I think we can get more out of the wonderful networks that we have in each of these countries.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just check, William? Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Can I just check? Do you think embassies have such targets at the moment or not?
They're not certainly as apparent as they could be. Okay. And
I just wanted to check that. Sorry to interrupt. Go on. Do continue.
Yeah. So we've certainly not got any sense that there are any targets in place. And then we also need to knit together things at our end here, so that we have a really integrated end-to-end approach from both the UK and the countries that we want to be exporting more into. That we're connecting businesses here with potential customers in those markets. So, let's say the diplomatic and consular and ambassadorial networks that we have are vital in that. But we also need to be reaching down more into our communities, and this is why we've called for more local delivery.
Conclusion. Go to Kate. How do we avoid businesses being accidental exporters? How do we, tell them that it's going to be easy, that they can achieve things, and how do we equip them with the right skills to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that exist?
In addition to making use of the overseas networks, there is a lot of work that can be done. And maybe William was about to touch on this at the local level. The international training.
Who's training these people? It's a skill. We don't have enough people with the skills. How do we get more people with the knowledge and expertise to take advantage of those opportunities?
I think this is a role that the International Trade Advisor Network can play in terms
They're not trainers. They don't train salespeople. Who's going to train the salespeople?
They can help businesses be proactive about finding opportunities. And I think a lot of the time, small businesses are very resilient, they're very innovative, and when you make the connections, they're able to get to the end themselves. So I think for me, the really important aspect is making those initial connections and putting businesses in the right rooms.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
This is such an important point. I just want to follow up very briefly about the GREAT campaign. So the GREAT campaign, awareness has been reasonably stable. I mean, we've taken evidence that does include some criticism about whether gov.uk is the best kind of platform. Can you just give us very briefly a view on the virtues of the GREAT campaign or how it needs to be refreshed and improved, please? John, do you want to start?
Well, I think it's an important campaign. I think for my member businesses, it's probably less about having particular instruments or government programs at home than having the right skills in posts overseas so that introductions can really be made, and above all that there is a good set of contacts among the ambassadors, heads of post and senior officials overseas of the corresponding sector overseas and its regulators, and having really good relations with them and a clear understanding of this. I think is really quite difficult, a clear understanding of how the sector works. Now,
okay, I'm just going to stop you there just because the clock is slightly against us. Anybody else want to pick up on GREAT?
Yeah, I mean, I think the GREAT campaign is valuable and has been, and the union in agri-food, for example, we know that the Union Jack and Britishness as brands can be helpful, but I think it's worth reflecting also that in the UK, particularly for food, actually the regional distinctions are also important, and we have to be careful not to sort of have a one-size-fits-all approach to how we promote and market goods for export. So, Scotland, for example, has a very strong identity in a lot of its agri-food exports. What therefore is important is that you capitalise on those identities, whether national, regional, even down to quite local levels, and that can be really strong in terms of branding and marketing overseas. But actually you are more coordinated, avoiding duplication in the sort of the support and the back office almost behind that in some senses. So that's really key.
Mr. Bain,
thank you very much, and I'm going to be very brief and make sure that you're giving me short answers, so apologies for this. Mr. Pawsey has already made the point about the 12-point plan to increase UK export. Is this working? I'm going to start with you, John. Do businesses understand what the 12 points are? Do they take advantage of what the government has outlined? And is this good value for taxpayers' money? You can use 3 words if you like to answer that.
Yes, I think they do. In my area, not all of the points are strictly relevant because there are other points such as gaining a market authorization in order to export a financial service to another country that are really much more important and will require legal advice to the business concerned.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kate, how effective are these 12 points for SMEs? And again, are they taking advantage of what's out in front of them?
As I touched on earlier, I think there is more that we could do with the export strategy, whether that's additional funding for trade shows, looking again at the support and guidance available. What I would add just quickly is that I think value for money is not necessarily the right question to ask, because I think it's important to dig into it a little bit and not make a quick judgment on that. I think it's important to think about not necessarily what are we gaining, but what are we not losing by having this support in place.
Thank you very much, Nick. And just finally on this bit, which is, you've mentioned agri-attachés and the trade commissioners. This committee, in its previous guise, when it was just the International Trade Committee, took a trip to the Gulf, where we were exploring the options of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And one of the most striking things is that the trade commissioner in the Gulf didn't sit in the trade negotiations. So you had this person with all this expertise. How well are these teams in country doing in terms of engaging with the sectors back at home to then try and help push the opportunities?
We've had an attaché in the Gulf. Actually, that was one of the original two posts. But as you say, maybe they're not as integrated as they might be. The Gulf's an interesting example. We're doing a trade negotiation there now that will hopefully reduce some tariff barriers there. But once we've done that, whatever the outcome is, there are still significant non-tariff barriers in accessing Gulf markets and regulatory barriers primarily, and it's a block of 6 countries, but each has different requirements regulatory from a regulatory perspective around SPS, etc. So, it'll be the first step in a long step to...
You think those trade commissioners and those attachés are being effective? Obviously, from 2 to 16, that's welcome.
It's very early days on that programme, so I think there needs to be some of those attachés are not even out in post yet. But as I've said, there have already been examples of successes, wins in some countries for those, so hopefully that'll continue.
And then this is more of a personal interest of mine, and so forgive me for asking, but recently there's been a bit of discussion around the role and value of the Board of Trade. I have my own views as to the direction of travel on that, but do any of you have any views as to whether or not this could be a more effective body for detailing our free trade agreements, their impact, the effectiveness of what the policies are that were outlined in the strategy? You don't have to have a view, but if you do, it's very helpful.
I would say any more independent strategic oversight of our trade policy would be a good thing, and if that's what a new Board of Trade does, then it would be a good thing.
It's as if I was leading you to that answer. I'm delighted with that. And then very finally, William, just to wrap this session up on my side, which is, how effectively is government helping businesses take advantage of the opportunities opened up by trade agreements?
Well, the BCC called for a trade growth office, and we're pleased that government set up what they've called the preference utilisation unit within DBT. But it just deals with the existing FTAs, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. Our recommendation is it should be much broader in scope. It should be helping businesses trade across our key markets. So it should be extended into EU and US as well. And that is one of the techniques we can do to boost exports.
Thank you.
Okay, look, that concludes our session. The clock is against us, I'm afraid, so we'll have to wrap it there. But thank you so much indeed for your evidence. You've told us that it's useful to have a big, clear target, but we need some supplementary targets to go with it, not least to try and get export support in the right place. Clear message around localising export support, not nationalising it. Virtue of things like peer-to-peer programmes is something that you've underlined. You've all talked about the importance of having good attachés abroad, using ambassadors and trade commissioners more effectively, potentially embassy-led targets, and you've given us some very useful pointers on the overall strategy, and all of you have underlined the need for some more strategy and targetry around e-commerce and paperless trade. So that's been a very useful session for us. Thank you very much. I'm going to suspend while we change over the panels. Order.
Where are they sending you?
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Panel of the Business and Trade Select Committee hearings into support for export-led growth. Thank you so much indeed for our international experts for joining us this morning. You're going to, I think, help us provide a really useful perspective on how we can learn from others. And Elena, maybe I could start with you. Could you just give us a starter for 10 on how does the UK and the support that we provide for exporters, how does that compare to the best-in-class other countries around the world?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, we have reviewed several case studies and we have collected a lot of evidence. I think we will focus mostly on the German model today and Australia and the Australian model. The UK has organised its export support on the principle of whole of government, quite successfully to an extent, since 2011 at least. And the 2018 export support strategy supported this even further, consolidating the collaboration between government departments, FCO, BASE and DIT, and the private sector. The latest one, however, the Made in the UK, Sold to the World, we thought that this bond and this close relationship between the government, whole of government, various departments, and the private sector has been a little bit looser, which is a point that we would like to draw attention to. So
As in, you mean the integration between departments is looser than other countries?
Between departments and the private sector. Australia has been also focusing their export support and organising it on the same principle, whole of government. They have created a one-stop shop. They have a very well-informed website, which enables potential exporters to just visit this website and through these get all the information they need. It's and also so from access to networks, from support from the government, also funding. It's a really one-stop shop, which is what we would like to see the UK do as well. I think to an extent, especially in the last couple of years, the UK hasn't fulfilled its mission to the extent that it could have done. And for example, the latest 2021 paper, Export Strategy, the promised an export academy providing several links and steps that exporters would like to take. But as of the 2nd of March, that's last Friday, this was still not enacted and clear enough. Germany...
You mean the Export Academy has not been set up, it's not open for business?
It's not accessible, at least. The steps that would be helpful to businesses is not there. The link has been moved. And also, one of the problems we identified in our review is that there is not enough stability in our model, in the sense that there are a lot of amendments, a lot of reviews, and a lot of changes, always obviously aiming towards greater efficiency. However, this has been very confusing for small businesses that don't have the resources, the knowledge, the know-how to follow these steps. So it has become less accessible than the Australian system or the German system. And something that Mark mentioned earlier, the German model, for example, has been pioneering and has been very, very good in its support to small exporters, because they have set up a network of various export support offices or agencies domestically. So the operationalization of the support to small companies is easier, is accessible, easier to access in various regions and various locations. So it's not only based on a national scheme, but also operationalized locally.
So you're drawing out three things there. You're drawing out there's an effective whole-of-government approach in some countries, simplicity of access. Second, there are perhaps stronger public-private links. And third, there's elsewhere stronger export support offices.
Yes, organised at a local level, not only the central government departments, DOT, for example. So in Germany, there are 30 plus such offices around the country. In the last few years, also supported, and this is a point that we wanted also to make because it's missing from the last export strategy paper, the digitalization that was mentioned earlier. So they have also added the function of supporting SMEs become digital in those centers, 4.0 centers of excellence, so they help and work towards upskilling their SMEs at a more local and regional level.
Okay, super, thank you. Mr. Paulson.
Sorry, can I follow up that point with Dr. Georgiadou? That you mentioned about Germany's 30 offices. Is that that comes at a cost, of course. So, are we not providing the same amount of financial support as countries such as Germany with those offices?
I can't compare figures, but what we can definitely derive from the review of the studies we made is that their support is a lot more targeted to firms that do not export yet but would like to take this leap, to engage in this endeavour. So they're a lot more targeted to those firms that...
I'm trying to get the cost, value for money, if you like. And so, is this an area where the more you spend, the more money you put into export promotion and the more advice and support and services you get, do you get a reward in increased exports? Or are sometimes these offices, white elephants, they're nice things that are nice to have, but they actually don't deliver? What's your assessment?
Well, obviously the German model works quite well. So there are, of course, diminishing marginal returns in the sense that after a point, obviously, any further investment in export would bring minimum returns. And to be honest, we can't really say with certainty what this optimal mix is of investment into export and returns. What we can say with certainty, though, is that from all the studies, at least all the other countries that we've reviewed, targeted support to this specific type of firms, which are the small and micro firms that don't export, has a very positive effect and is cost effective. So there is extensive margin. So there's evidence that there is greater cost effectiveness, if you like, on the extensive margin, which is exactly these firms.
Okay, we've heard a great deal from you about the German model. We really ought to come to Mr. Kober and ask him, presumably these 30 offices are there, the German authorities consider that value for money because they're continuing to support them. So tell us a little bit about the German approach.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to provide you with a German perspective. So our system works in a way that we have 79 local chambers in Germany. They represent all 3.5 million companies. It's a very, I would say, the chamber system has stood the test of time. We have some chambers that are older than 500 years. And as what has been pointed out, I think the crucial point here is that these chambers are really grassroots organizations. They are locally based. They're very well connected locally with the local authorities, local politicians, local other business networks that exist. As a matter of fact, they deal with the companies on a day-by-day basis because they, for example, run the system of vocational training together with the trade unions. They do certificates of origin, all kinds of issues, activities, so the companies really know them and they know the needs of the companies. And we as DIHK, we represent this whole system, and we also manage this network of 151 chambers abroad. In 151 locations around the globe since the 19th century. I think the real synergies, they come really from this networking effect, that the local chambers are very, very well connected through us to the chambers abroad. So they always know what is happening on the ground abroad and relay that in both ways, and always continuously adapt their services to the needs.
Okay, one of the things that we're interested in is value for money, and therefore who pays for this. And in many cases, much of the UK activity is funded by central government, but chambers of commerce are often funded by their members. So where's, for this very effective regime that exists within Germany, who's paying for it, the businesses or the government?
So our local chambers of commerce, they are membership-based, so the members pay their fees, and on top they also pay for certain services. But many services that you might be interested, like first-time support for SMEs trying to export, they are free.
So who funds that?
The funding is all the members, all the companies. They are members and they pay for everything the chamber system needs. The difference we have is with our overseas chambers. Okay. There we don't have a membership by law, so it's the membership is voluntary as well. These companies pay membership fees, services, and then there is a support from the government depending on certain business locations you want to develop. In some countries you are not allowed to offer some services, so it's quite difficult to run the chambers sustainably. But we also do have chambers abroad that receive no government money.
And I raised the question about training, particularly in the area of sales skills. So is that something that would be covered by the chamber model?
Can you repeat?
The training for sales skills, because sales is a skill and selling in overseas markets is different from selling in a domestic market. So would upskilling to enable businesses, German businesses, take advantage of overseas opportunities, is that included within the facilities that are offered by the chambers?
So in the sense that our chambers, I looked up the figures for export related conferences. We do around 3,000 a year. The local chambers and the chambers abroad, they offer coaching sessions. Also, we have an export academy. So that is within the range of activities.
And Mr. Ito, perhaps you could give us a Japanese perspective.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to explain briefly about our organization's activities. Actually, Japanese government doesn't have a coherent export strategy across sectors, but there are some individual export-related strategies, such as the export promotion of agricultural products and food, or export promotion for SMEs. And JETRO and other government agencies implement support measures based on these government strategies and policies. And for our organization, JETRO, we have 4 priority areas of work based on this Japanese government's strategy. First one is facilitating innovations through inward FDIs in Japan, and supporting overseas expansions of startups. This is our first pillar. And second one is supporting exports of Japanese agricultural, forestry, fishery products, and food. The third one is assisting Japanese companies with their overseas businesses. It's mainly dedicated to export from SMEs. And the final one is contributing to the activities of Japanese companies and trade policy developments of the government through research. That is our main 4 pillars of activities.
Right. Very helpful, thank you.
Can I just double check? So in the German model, what sort of percentage of the Chamber's budget come from local businesses compared to the state?
For the local chambers, there is no money coming from the state.
So it's 100%. And membership of a chamber is compulsory for a German business?
By law, yes.
Yeah, perfect. And in Japan, have you got a sense of how much money comes from the state and how much money comes from business?
Actually, our organization is fully funded by the government.
Fully funded by the government. Okay, so very, very different models. Thanks very much. Mr. MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Cobra, I know you've touched upon this already, but would you just say a little bit more about how a German company wants to export gets going with that? Because I'm aware of this, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy, the 3 pillars. Mm-hmm. And how does that fit in? You've got assisting in market access, the reduction of risks, and the reduction of market entry barriers. So if a company's getting going, how does that play through and allow that German company to begin the process? What does that look like?
Yes, very happy to do so. If you read the German foreign trade law, the first sentence actually says that foreign trade is free, and then you have pages upon pages stating all the limitations and the regulations. So you can imagine for companies, especially first-time exporters, SMEs, they really have to go through a lot of regulations. It's really very overwhelming for them to understand what kind of regulations they have in Germany, even to start exporting, to export, then to import on the other side, which other product regulations they have to follow. And whereas I think there is a wealth of information out there are a lot of information services that our chambers provide, both in Germany and overseas, that the GTIA, which is, as you said, the third column, so an organization that is purely there to offer market intelligence, statistics, data, so companies can read through and understand what potentials markets have or what risks there are. The other pillar being the German government, of course, that uses the embassies more, I would say, on a higher political level as a door opener, has very good contacts, of course, to the local governments. And I would say our chambers, they're mainly there to help companies understand all this information and make the right assessments, because they both have the experience in terms of understanding countries, understanding thematic issues like contracts, like liability abroad, but also they have the networks. So we have trade committees in every local chamber, so it's a good opportunity to meet other CEOs to understand how they access markets, what difficulties they face. We have B2B matchmaking, we have an export app where they can get in touch with others. And so I think normally the journey, every export starts at home. That's why the companies, normally small ones especially, turn to their local chambers that they already know. They will then explain them what kind of things they have to follow, move them to the chamber abroad that can help them. And in the end, I would say the export is just the start of the journey, and a lot of companies actually then want to continue exporting with other customers or even start investing abroad.
I'm noting that over 44% of German SMEs were estimated to be exporters. That's compared with 9% in the UK. Are you telling us that that's the model that you've outlined there? I suppose it's self-evident. You're suggesting there's some lessons for us to learn from the German model?
I think I can only speak for what our companies tell us and how we feel that our system works. We feel that the cooperation between government and business is very crucial. I think there is a bipartisan consensus in Germany that supporting SMEs, but also supporting international trade is important. I think 79% of German exports are actually made are actually SMEs exporting. So and if you look at our jobs, we have 1 in every 4th job depends on foreign trade, on exports actually. For the industry sector, it's even more than every 2nd job. So there is really, I think, a whole understanding that we need trade agreements that make it easier to trade, but also reduce barriers at home, red tape, make sure companies can also profit from that, offer information services, online portals like the access to markets, trade networks. And then I would say a lot of products from Germany are very much in demand globally. Made in Germany has a good reputation, and I think many German companies not only do exporting as a one-off exercise, dropping a good somewhere, but actually offer the full package, maintenance services. So it's really a commitment to stay engaged in the market for a long period of time, and for that we think skilled workers are really the key. That's what all our companies tell us. We really cherish our vocational training system because it provides us with employees who really can do the job and are motivated.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. Itito-san, can I just ask you about jet trades? Because you've outlined the priorities around facilitating innovation, supporting export of agri-goods, supporting SMEs, contributing to trade policy development. But if I am a small business, what is the day-to-day sort of process to actually reach these export markets? Could you walk us through that, please?
Okay, thank you for your question. For SME supports, there are various measures for us. First of all, we provide the information about the markets, regulations, taxation, and other issues in each country to public or via seminar or online articles to SMEs. And also we deploy some experts. They are generally former employees in big trading firms or manufacturers who are working in overseas countries. So they provide hands-on support to SMEs in the forming up their export plans, or they will support their negotiation with overseas business partners. So that's such kind of supports by experts to SMEs is one of our peers in supporting SMEs.
One of the sort of interesting comparisons compared to yours and the German model is that yours appears to be a little bit less formal in respect that you're not asking businesses to have any sort of tie-in or sort of, I think tie-in to governments or management, and so therefore it makes it a little bit easier. How do you compare yourself to the German model? Do you learn from them? Do you think you are heading beyond their model? Sorry, it's a bit unfair when you're sitting next to your colleague from Germany.
I think the differences between what I talk and from the German perspectives is partly due to the difference of the characteristics of our organization because we are a sub-governmental organization and we are working under the governmental policy. So I just explained about the support by experts to the SMEs. That was originally from the Japanese government's policy. After conclusion of former TPP, not CPTPP, former TPP, we asked to Japanese government asked to JETRO to formulate such kind of support. So it's the difference of characteristics provided by Chamber of Commerce and the government.
Just two sort of follow-up questions, if I may. I mean, what percentage, and forgive me for not knowing this, what percentage of Japanese SMEs are exporters?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, thank you. There are many figures about the ratio of exporting SMEs, but I have one figure which is related to our government target. In 2020, 80.2% of Japanese SMEs exported.
18.2.
18.2.
18.2. Thank you very much. I also understand from the work we've done around this session is that you operate something called a trade tie-up program, which is matching sellers of Japanese products to foreign buyers. Could you just perhaps also give us a bit of an idea of how that works in practice and how effective it is? And forgive me, I'm also going to just ask, there's been an enhanced agreement between the UK and Japan. Obviously, membership with CPTPP for the UK to join is underway. Just wonder if you're seeing any sort of changes between our two countries and where you're seeing businesses in Japan take advantage of the rollover agreement we have with you, and indeed through membership of CPTPP. Sorry, there's a lot in that.
Okay, thank you very much. First, about the kind of matching of buyers from other countries and Japanese SMEs and the products. So we have 49 domestic offices within Japan, and they are talking with local SMEs in Japan, and they know what kind of products, what kind of services they have. And also we sometimes talk to the some platforms for matching, or platforms like for e-commerce. For example, we are talking with Amazon, we are talking with Ocado, and they have some special pages dedicated to the sales of Japanese products. Mm-hmm. So we will talk with domestic producers, and also we will talk with such kind of platformers. So that will be kind of one of the channels for Japanese SMEs and producers to export to overseas. That is the brief answers for your first questions. And also, could you repeat your second question?
Well, now I can't remember it, actually. Sorry. No good at all. I might come back to you on that one.
Whether you detected any change in...
Oh, yes, beg your pardon.
Okay, yes, very, very important one.
Listening.
Thank you very much.
Well, actually, of course, there's the new membership of UK to CPTPP, and also we have bilateral trade agreements previously concluded. So that is there's not so the objective data or something, but we feel there's some the atmosphere within Japanese businesses to seek there are any possibilities for collaboration between Japanese businesses and UK businesses.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Elena, can I come back to you, please, and just ask, if you take a step back, do you have observations about what makes for a really best-in-class export promotion service? When you look around the world, what are the key things that stand out for you?
Well, yes, we have reflected quite a bit upon that. So we would recommend a system, a hybrid system, and by hybrid we mean a step further from a whole of government, one which intensifies a lot of this collaboration between the government and external in the private sector partners, chambers of commerce as well, local enterprise partners. So first of all, it would be one that would provide a one-stop shop. So there's one point of access for potential exporters to get information, market intelligence, contacts, the appropriate agents that they would like to access. So step number one, one-stop shop. Step number two, ideally we would like to see, I think, that being an independent from the participating government departments, with really clear and transparent annual reports on the expenditure, on the achievements it has across various activities that they organize. So we would like to see, we think that an efficient and effective such system, export support system, would make very good use of existing resources. So it's all about intensifying collaboration and cooperation, both at home and abroad. We'd like to see intensification of this whole of government, and colleagues previously mentioned this, the representation of experts in our embassies overseas. Training, because we've been talking about upskilling and training, which is spot on, of SMEs, and it has to be. It's all about empowering our SMEs at home, providing them the skills to become independent, so that the system is sustainable. But at the same time, we think that, and observing other cases from collecting some evidence, that a similar amount of upskilling has to happen at our embassies overseas, perhaps with more participation from the chambers of commerce, so that there's this cross-fertilization of values, the business values, and some more political values, if you like. Also, more training, as I said, overseas in our embassies in advocacy, negotiation of contracts, terms of IP. Also, you mentioned before, diplomatic channels can improve the work and guidance on regulatory requirements, help and support on aspects like ESG accreditation, because in the clean energy sector, for example, accreditation, companies might need help and support to apply for accreditation. And we believe that, following from what has been said already, a proactive system rather than reactive, one that starts upskilling SMEs at home on a more local level, helping SMEs develop those skills to become active internationally. Enhanced representation of technological expertise in diplomatic missions, we think, is also key. And as it was mentioned earlier, we strongly recommend this intensification of support, and perhaps even a platform for real-time chat between exporters and overseas embassies, so that there is real-time communication and problem-solving, because there's a lot of crisis management that has to be done with regards to conflict resolution, overcoming barriers, and something that just the point that was mentioned earlier that links to the model, the recommendations we're making. You talked a lot about how we overcome these perceived barriers, and not only perceived but real, tangible barriers. This has to start from home, and this has to start from closer cooperation with SME, small companies, to show them that it is possible. Internationalization is for them a channel of growth.
I must say, I like this phrase that every export starts at home. Can I maybe just come to you then and just ask for a German perspective on 2 points that Elena has flagged? So one is around governance. When I visited the headquarters of the German Chamber of Commerce in Berlin, one of the really impressive things is the way that the governance team, say for Asia Pacific, includes the chief executive of Robert Bosch, it includes the chief executive of BMW. You've got some really powerful industrial players actually helping lead the governance of the export strategy in a way that's deeply connected to the government too. Is that important? How important is that in driving exports strategically?
I think it's very crucial. As you said, our membership includes all sectors, all range of businesses, small and big. And that means for us it's a lot of work, because we have to balance out all of these views. As you can imagine, not all the views are always go into the same direction, but it is our legal duty to get this input from all of them and then find a balanced position on various positions. And I think when we talk to government, when we talk to authorities, also third countries, I think that's a very valuable input, and our counterparts feel that we do this balancing out of different interests, sort of a overarching interest of the economy, if you want to, and the contacts we have on every level with the government, both in Berlin, but of course also on the European level, to feed into trade negotiations, to feed into different channels to break down trade barriers abroad, but also at home. If you look at different kinds of regulations that are coming up, if you look at the way customs is set up, customs systems are working or not working that well.
It's an effective model for flagging issues
Absolutely.
That business has with government quite quickly.
And also it's not a one-off process, but it's a continuous process, evaluating and
when the Chancellor, for example, goes to visit countries abroad, there's a very structured process for gathering input from business into an issue list that the Chancellor then advocates with their equivalent head of state abroad. Could you say a word about that?
Well, obviously, I can't get too much into the specifics of these kind of sensitive missions, but yes, whenever there is a minister traveling, the chancellor traveling, as you've been to our headquarters in Berlin, you've noticed you have the DHK, the chambers, together with the BDI, which is the sort of German CBI, and the employers organization, and so together we are then being contacted on this specific visit, and it is our duty to find companies that could accompany the trip, and also bring issues to the table that are of importance. So that is oftentimes a very short period of notice, so it's a lot of work we have to do, sometimes overnight, but in the end I think it's worth it.
Yeah. And in Japan, could you say a word about how the public-private partnership is structured?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, in various Japanese business organizations, including Chamber of Commerce, there are various channels to talk with the government about the trade policy. For example, for some specific countries' market, there is some committee within business organizations, and sometimes government officials invite you to that meeting, and the business side will provide the information about the problem they are facing with respect to their local regulation or something, and the government will hear the situation, and eventually they may talk with in the governmental level talk, or sometimes the Secretary of State level dialogues. We will post those kind of some troubles or problems with respect to business environments, and sometimes ask to those countries to make some change of their regulations, something. This is one form of our transaction between public and private.
Perfect. Well, the clock is against us, so that brings us to the conclusion of our panel, but that has been an extremely valuable set of evidence for the committee. We're really grateful to you. You've told us about the importance of having that one-stop shop. You've told us about the importance of really deep networks, both domestically and internationally. You've told us a lot about the importance of training, especially for SMEs, that needs to be proactive as well as reactive. You told us a lot about the importance of supporting people with digitalisation. So that has been some really useful pointers for the conclusions that we need to come to in our report. So thank you very much indeed for that evidence. That concludes this panel. Order.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Order. Welcome to the third panel for our Select Committee hearings today on export-led growth. I'm absolutely delighted that you have both been able to join us, two of our most important exporters. We're looking to you for some advice and some evidence and some argument about how we need to improve our export performance and our export support in the future. And I'm delighted that Mark Pawsey is going to open the questioning for us.
Well, good morning. And just to set a benchmark, I'm wondering if each of you can tell us a little bit about the proportion of the sales that your businesses achieve on an annual basis that's achieved through exports, and we'll then go on to how we grow that and what government's doing that's successful. But in the first instance, where do each of your businesses sit? Perhaps if I might start with you, Vince, if I may first.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all very much for the invitation to be here. I'm with ARM, a semiconductor design company headquartered in Cambridge. We have 4 offices across the UK, also have offices in Manchester, Bristol, and Sheffield. Collectively, those 4 offices represent more than half of our global workforce, so incredibly important offices to the overall operations of ARM. We, as a company, we do about $3 billion in global sales. About half of that is from IP licensing. The other half is from royalties. So the licensing is directly related to exports. Despite having only about half of our global workforce here, 95% of our exports come from the UK. So our technology starts in Cambridge with our architecture. That architecture then goes out to CPU and GPU design teams. When they design CPUs and GPUs, that technology is then delivered back to Cambridge and we license globally. So again, about 95% of our exports are delivered digitally from Cambridge. All of our exports are digital, so we have a lot to say, I think, on digital exports and the treatment of digital products, which I can get into later. But incredibly important for us, incredibly important to be able to access markets globally. We develop one product that we license globally, and so the ability to export from the UK is incredibly important for us.
I'm just going to pause and invite Dylan McMahon to join the panel because he has just arrived, and then Chris will come to you.
Chris, if you tell us about Rolls-Royce and the extent of exports and the importance of exports to your business.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. So Rolls-Royce in the UK operates really in 3 main sectors: civil aerospace, providing gas turbines for aircraft; the defence business, a global defence business, but has a big part of it here in the UK, and also our nuclear activities here in the UK, powering the nuclear submarines, and also our small modular reactor activity, which we can talk more about as being a great export growth opportunity. So civil aerospace, defence and nuclear activities, employing 21,000 people in the UK. Export is a huge factor in all those businesses. Some 80% of all the goods we produce in the UK are exported. So that's 80% of all the goods we produce in the UK are for export. That's some 1.3% of the total UK's export of goods, and some 27% of all UK aerospace exports are from Rolls-Royce. So, and the economic value that brings to the UK is enormous. You know, some 21,000 people in Rolls-Royce in the UK, but over 90,000 in the supply chain, where we spend some £2.6 billion a year servicing that business and those exports.
That's really helpful as a benchmark. Just to explain, we're getting an understanding, a benchmark. I wonder if you could tell us about the total size of the business you represent and the proportion of your sales that are currently exported.
No problem. My name is Dylan McMahon, representing Kendal Nutricare. We're a manufacturer based out of the northwest of England in Kendal, where we manufacture a range of different nutrition products, all dairy-based, infant formula being the largest export. Our company has increased over tenfold in the last 24 months due to a large export opportunity in the United States. And today our run rate of exports is over $250 million, which represents over 70% of our business. A great deal of that goes into the United States. A certain amount goes into Asia, the Middle East and Africa.
I'm wondering if we can also ask each of you how the export of your products is built into your overall business strategy, and we'll come on then to ask about how the government supports in achieving that. So perhaps I could run across again. So Vincent, how is exports baked into what you're doing?
Yeah, it's how our company operates. I mean, as I mentioned, we develop one product and license that product globally. So it's absolutely essential that we're able to access markets. And the reason for that is we're the foundation of a lot of technology. Software and other technology products are developed to run on top of ARM CPUs, so we need that consistency. We need to be able to deliver our products from...
I'm assuming in the absence of exports, you'd be a relatively small player in a relatively small domestic market.
Yeah, it would probably not be a stretch to say we would not be in existence.
Thank you. And Chris, you said 80% of your business is exports. Again, there isn't a domestic market in the UK big enough to...
There is, but not a immensely large one. Yeah. Right. So we're a global business operating in those sectors which are very advantaged, highly differentiated, high barriers to entry, very few international competitors, and the market is a global one. So exports are at the absolute heart of our business strategy.
How is that baked into the culture of your business? And right from the shop floor through to all activities within the organisation.
Our markets are global markets, so all our businesses are operating. Most of their time is looking externally to maximise those sales and returns for the business. So right. It's just integral to how we operate.
And Dylan, I'm assuming your business was a domestic supplier until relatively recently. So how has the export side of the business developed?
So our business is today a large, significantly export-driven business, although it was previously. And anybody familiar with the infant formula market in China would know that at a point in time, Kendal Nutricare represented over 10% of all imports into China in food and drink from the UK. But just to echo the comments here, I think exports are fundamental to our business. We are a business that relies on a growing population, and when you consider our population decline or specifically where there's opportunities for growth for our business, those are growing populations, growing middle classes. This is fundamental. Right,
and we're quite interested in opportunities that might arise for other businesses. So how did the export opportunity become apparent relatively recently to your organisation? Looking at the other two organisations that have had exports baked into their businesses from a very early stage, but in your case it's a relatively recent phenomenon. So how did it come about, and was it as a consequence of your own activity or activity undertaken by others?
Certainly of our own activity. As I say, the market opportunity for our business relied entirely on exports. There is a limited...
How did you come to know that this opportunity was in that place at that time?
It's just a fact of knowing your business. We know that infant formula, for example, taking that as our key product, is a product which grows in growing economies where there's a growing middle class with a growing population.
Right, so there's no external agency that came along to you guys and said, hey, we recognise this opportunity here, you might want to be a part of it. You're saying, did you have people in country at the time who knew about... We're wanting to understand how you learned that we can then encourage others to do the same thing.
Sure. Well, absolutely. Look, we travelled on a trade mission with Theresa May back to China.
Oh, there was a trade mission that was the initiative. Right, okay, that's great.
One initiative for the Chinese market had played a role, but I would say that a lot of this is integral to our business. Exports are always known. We travel to conferences around the world. We go to meet distributors. We build markets in the Middle East and Asia using a distribution model. For example, we work directly with the United States.
And all of that takes time and investment.
Certainly.
Well ahead of achieving those results. So how did your business make the decision to speculatively go on these trade missions and spend that money without having any guarantee that the business was going to follow?
Correct, there was no guarantee, and certainly it's a challenging business, and it's a very expensive industry to operate in. Operating spray dryers is expensive, but it was clear that there was a very limited growth opportunity in the United Kingdom. Export was fundamental to the survival of jobs. We've tripled the number of jobs in our facility in Kendal, and that entirely relies on growth that relies on exports, because our factory becomes more efficient when we increase our tonnage of product. In order to do that, we need an increased market. In order to do that, we need exports.
It provides you with economies of scale. But
correct.
Whose decision was it to make that investment to go out and look for it? And what was the time lag between you spending time in country and developing the relationships and business materialising? How long did that take?
Look, we're a family business operated by myself, my brother, my father. We made the decision entirely ourselves. And ultimately, this was a personal investment. The business was built using personal finances, and we took that risk. We knew that if we wanted to grow, we had to export. We invested knowing that there wouldn't be an immediate return. Infant formula is an industry built on trust. People don't buy a new brand in the way they might buy a bar of chocolate or a luxury item. This is something that requires trust. It requires a network in the healthcare in a local economy. So it was always key to us to enter these markets, to establish ourselves, to build that trust. And certainly these markets don't grow quickly. We've been operating in Asia and the Middle East for over 7 years, and that market grows steadily, but it doesn't grow overnight.
So would your message be to intending exporters, they need to be patient?
No, I suppose our guidance would be that they should make every effort to try and build networks in these economies, because they can't always rely on the support of trade missions. We haven't been on one in over 7 years, so they're going to have to take their own initiative to travel overseas, to make that investment, to take that risk on their own accord, and they're going to have to build relationships on the ground with distributors, with those in the industry, I suppose, that can advise them on how best to grow.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Vince, when I interviewed Sir Robin Saxby for the book I was writing on entrepreneurs a few years ago, he told a very interesting story about how he tried to build Arm as a global business right from the outset, because he recognised that the UK was going to be a small market in a big world, and therefore you had to be global from the outset. Can you tell us today, from your point of view, what are the key barriers to exports today?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and great that you have that context of meeting with Mr. Saxby. One of the main barriers that we're seeing is actually not coming from the UK. It's the localization of technology, both wanting to build domestic supply chains, but also countries that have domestic supply chains wanting to protect those primarily through export controls. Again, back to my earlier points, our business model is built on being able to deliver one product. So whenever we see countries either putting up barriers to sell our products into that market because they want to promote a domestic player, or whenever we see countries putting up barriers to us exporting our product out of national security concerns or otherwise, that is incredibly impactful to us. It undermines our reputation as a reliable supply partner. And so I would say those are some of the biggest barriers we're currently facing.
So give us a case study, give us a vignette. I mean, how does that kind of development hit your top line?
Sure.
You're trying to sell something, you've got some national security concerns in a market you're trying to sell to. How do those dynamics then play out?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things we're seeing is that there are competitor technologies popping up. Both the EU, India, China are all exploring this competitive technology, and they're doing that because they want to create a domestic alternative to this technology that we provide. So we're seeing that local government support in those markets specifically for this alternative technology. And then when we're developing products in, say, the U.S., we are seeing increasingly restrictive export controls. And fully recognizing the intent and necessity of export controls, we think that the approach that the U.S. has taken is not targeted. And so that's further incentivizing these other governments to want to look for alternatives because they don't view ARM as a reliable partner, or they only view us as able to deliver older technology, lower-end technology, and that's creating a lot of problems for us. It really limits our ability to portray ourselves as the global technology platform to innovate on top of. And so thankfully we have a much better export environment from the UK than we face in the US right now, but things are very tenuous, absolutely, across the world right now in the semiconductor space.
And you feel that is slowing down your export growth today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Chris, from your point of view, what are the main barriers that you see.
Yeah. I mean, firstly, I'd say Rolls-Royce has been very successful in exporting, and the government is a very critical part of enabling that. But perhaps I'll talk about a few of the enablers of maximising that export opportunity. And I think there's three. One is a very well-coordinated and integrated cross-government approach to the support of campaigns. We have outstanding capability in our embassies and high commissions and such like around the world, and we draw on those heavily. But back in central government, making sure that we pull all the levers in a coordinated manner to maximise the opportunity on strategic campaigns is important. And particularly in the defence world, it's not just a sale of product, increasingly it's about co-development of capability with countries, and therefore the importance of government-to-government arrangements to facilitate and underpin those opportunities. Government-to-government frameworks which lay out the contracting framework, the funding, the security considerations, the IP rights, etc., etc. And a good example, perhaps any business with India. I think 75% of all imports to India deals are under government-to-government arrangements.
Say that again, because it is such an important fact.
It's in this world of particularly co-development, but also product sales. And the example I was using was in India, where 75% of the successful exports to India from around the world are enabled and facilitated by government-to-government arrangements. So that's.
Just tell us what is a government-to-government arrangement?
Well, yes, I think it's a framework which then lays out the basis of how it's going to be funded, how data is going to be exchanged, the security of IP, the way it's going to be governed between the two governments, all the enabling framework to allow progress to be made more rapidly than it would otherwise happen. So I think that's important. I think supporting critical technology development is also important. You just talked earlier about, from Dylan, about the length of time it takes to bring some products to market. Of course, in the aerospace market, that is a very long period of time with very high investments in R&D, well ahead of any market entry point. Could be 15 years plus ahead of that. So in areas which are strategically advantaged, highly differentiated, going to be playing a big part on the global stage, government investment into those technologies is critical. And we've benefited hugely from ATI funding, for example, the Aerospace Technology Institute in our aerospace world. That takes support up to technology readiness level 6, the demonstration in a representative environment. Further funding through the development of product would be further helpful. And just a comparator, we believe our US competitors probably benefit by about double the amount of government investment into there, and that's who we're competing against.
And that's not related to the IRA.
No, that's just leveraging government investment. So, whole of government approach, technology in critical technology investment in those selected sectors, and finally, and perhaps most important, particularly in business which is government business, so defence world and certainly the nuclear world, whether it be civil or defence nuclear, home market endorsement and home market selection is absolutely critical. And this is very relevant at the moment to our small modular reactor opportunity. I think small modular reactors will have a huge export market, driven by the increasing nuclear ambitions in many countries, driven by energy security, net zero, the need for electricity for highly power dense industries, for AI data centres, for example. There will be a huge market, and where first mover advantage will be very important because there'll end up being very few winners in this world, and endorsement and selection by your home country gives confidence for those international opportunities, and we are seeing that currently as being an impediment to some of progressing some of our international, very positive potential export orders.
So some of these things are not necessarily covered by the traditional FTA agreements. I think what I'm hearing is that sometimes the government-to-government bargains could be more important than the FTAs and their details.
Yes, for us, the free trade agreements are slightly less important because the aerospace world is covered by WTO rules, and the government-to-government arrangements in defence are probably more powerful, yes.
Yeah. What are the principal exports that you bump into? Principal barriers to exports that you bump into?
Sure. Well, I suppose, look, the first thing certainly does relate back to the funding opportunities for British built businesses in comparison to even our counterparts in Ireland, I would say, in the dairy industry. If you look at the way that dairy cooperatives in Ireland have been supported, research and development centres in excess of 20 million euros being invested in their industries being supported, and in spite of that, major multinationals like Nestle closing facilities at the same time, to the loss of 540 jobs in Ireland, which really is an indication of the impact that is being had on the industry and the likes of ourselves. So additional funding opportunities so that we continue to increase our manufacturing capabilities in the UK. In our case, that's a spray dryer typically, or a new evaporator. That might be an investment of a minimum of £30 million. But we're not seeing any funding provided for that. And as a privately owned, family-led business, that is challenging. And it certainly begs the question, when there are facilities all over Europe that are being supported massively by the European Union, how a British business is A, meant to grow, and B, meant to compete with just limited access to funding. I would say in addition to that, we would look for additional clarity in trade negotiations. An indication of this is that in the last 2 years alone, we've paid over $35 million in import tariffs to the United States government on infant formula. That's an enormous challenge. That's in spite of the fact that we entered the market to actually support during a humanitarian crisis period, during which period infant formula actually had tariff waived for a period up to about 9 months. That waiver then expired, was never brought back in, and increases, it's a 20% tariff on our imports. It's enormously challenging, and it does appear that certainly there's no great priority at the moment for that to be reversed on the UK side. I would say, in addition to that, what I would just say is on regulations. It's fundamentally important that the United Kingdom is aligning itself with major regulations in food and nutrition, labelling. When you look at the infant formula market, it's divided into regulations, the FDA in the United States, the European Union, and the Codex Alimentarius in the Middle East and African markets. The UK is now straying from European regulations.
Is that a problem?
It's not a problem yet, because although it's lagging, it does appear to be attempting to mimic European regulations. But the moment that it does stray, or those regulations aren't mirrored, or the UK decides to stray aside, well, fundamentally our product changes entirely. Our product is a powdered infant formula, and the nutritional levels, whether it's the proteins, the fats, the carbohydrates, a given mineral, have to exist within certain parameters. And if our product in the UK is being held to a different standard to the product in the European Union, then that means I have to double the amount of product I'm making, because I have to fundamentally serve two markets. And apologies for reverting back, but that also actually relates to the trade agreements. When you look at the Windsor framework, for example, I don't believe that businesses like ours were involved enough in that process. There's no requirement from later this year, Q3, and apologies, I don't have the exact month, but there is a requirement that we will have to put a statement on every can, whether it is made for the UK or made for the EU. Now, for a negotiating party, that might have felt like a very small give. But for a business like ours that has to purchase up to 100,000 tins of packaging for every individual SKU that we make, those three little words mean I have to make 200,000, one for Europe, one for the UK. And that's fine when we've grown to our size, finally. But what I would say is, if I go back 3 years, when we were truly an SME, no chance. We needed the ability to operate with the same product under the same regulations in multiple territories. And a regulation like the Windsor Framework, which was deemed to be a success, would fundamentally have been terminal to our business in Ireland, in the Czech Republic, and Poland, because we wouldn't have been able to meet the minimum order quantities for our packaging. So businesses like ours need to be closer to these trade negotiations. When Chris mentioned about India, India is a major challenge. We look to India as an ideal territory to export, and we believe that infant formula should be carved out. Infant formula was carved out by the Australians in their negotiation with India. We see a growing middle class, an enormous population, an enormous export opportunity, even in excess of the 200 million that we're exporting into the United States. But that's limited by the fact that there might be an import tariff in excess of 60% going into India, which makes our product entirely uncompetitive. So I think those would be the three.
Super useful, thank you. Mr. MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's fascinating listening to you all. I wanted to ask you about the range of services that the government provides to exporters. I'm not entirely sure it's highly relevant given what we've heard from you today, but are you able to tell us a little bit about the services that you receive from government to assist you in your exporting journey and whether they're very effective? And Chris, I don't know whether are you too big for us to get involved in that conversation?
No, a huge amount of support in a number of aspects. So I'll pick out UK export finance, for example. Extremely valuable, do a great job, support our customers, or Airbus's customers and Boeing customers in financing aircraft to facilitate exports, and therefore our engines go on those exports. They are talking to with some of our SMR potential country customers to say what levels of support they might give. So I think UK export finance is very, very powerful. The diplomatic network, as I've described, is extremely useful in campaigns, mainly from the depth of relationships and insights and just trust in the UK that they promote. Which I think we utilise that very effectively around the world. The Defence Exports Group in Department of Business and Trade is getting critical in some of those government-to-government arrangements. That's where that's increasing the horsepower in that area to make sure they can be progressed at pace will be valuable, and they do a great job. And of course the export control unit also, as export control has been mentioned once, but I think that's another area we draw on support. Again, works well. An area of potential improvement is just the engagement to get perhaps more anticipation of what's to come, and therefore to increase the pace of some of those approvals and such like.
Vince, do you want to add anything?
I thought Chris's answers were great. I would just say on the export control work, we do have kind of an ongoing regular dialogue. We do run into a few issues around export controls from the UK, primarily for higher end technology that would go into, say, data centers or servers, and it takes a lot of engagement from our teams to kind of explain what that technology is. And we run into issues even exporting that technology to allies, so Taiwan, South Korea, India, Israel, Singapore. And so, I think that would probably be the area of government that we engage with the most. We're because there's kind of a very small subset of companies that we can actually sell to globally, we generally know the marketplace, so don't use a lot of the other mechanisms. So yeah, I would leave it at that. Thank you.
Dylan, your journey is a different one, and I'm just trying to, because you we were once an SME. I'm trying to put my head into the sort of your situation. The trade mission was critically important to you. That was perhaps what, but thinking about other companies who would like to emulate your success, and I was thinking to what Mr. Posey was saying about some of the services that are available. Could you say a little bit about what works, where the deficiencies might be, how effective were government services to you in growing your company in the way that you did?
Certainly, thank you. And it certainly wasn't long ago we were an SME. We just founded the business in 2015, so it's been quite the journey. But what I would say is that, I can really speak specifically to the food industry. I've travelled all over the world to different conferences, from Vita Foods to Expo West to Gulf Foods in the Middle East. And one thing that would certainly be more helpful would be to see the United Kingdom under a more united banner. At these conferences, oftentimes you see that whether it's Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, we can find ourselves divided in these trade floors. What that fundamentally does, I assume, is that it's drawing from a single pot, potentially in certain cases multiple pots, but it's actually making the United Kingdom in certain cases look smaller than it is on a global scale. Again, when we look to our counterparts in Ireland, certainly one thing that they've consistently been praised for is their support of the dairy industry, which is obviously fundamental. Ireland's actually, relative to its population, the greatest exporter of infant formula in the world, which is quite a fact. About 70% of the infant formula in Europe coming from Ireland, unbelievably. But they operate under a brand Origin Green, and that is supported exceptionally well. It consistently has exceptionally good funding opportunities at these trade fairs. It represents itself well under a single banner. You know, for us in our industry, infant formula represents the biggest opportunity for the premiumization or the value add of the dairy industry. We're now, not only are we moving to organic dairy, we're moving to American organic dairy, which is a major value add for dairy. But I think for small businesses like ourselves, years ago growing up, it takes a long time to be present on those trade shows, though we were very fortunate to have been taking part in that trade mission. But it would have been helpful if there had been a more consistent banner for British food and drink being exported, and specifically British dairy, because in comparison, it's, you know, that's fundamentally our greatest USP. The biggest strength of our business is the strength of our team and the strength of British dairy. And we rely heavily on that, and we've had to invest ourselves in building that brand. If the government could get behind supporting British farming, British dairy in a more holistic way, then many businesses would be drawn up like that. So I suppose that'd be the first thing, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you're all in front of us because you are very successful exporting businesses, and we heard in our evidence from our German colleague about how big businesses, big exporters, sort of lead their export activity and share some of the expertise they've got with smaller businesses perhaps looking to export in for the first time. Do you see any evidence of that in our institutional setup? And are there any ways that you can engage maybe people within your supply chain or other companies more broadly about how you can help them export more? Perhaps Vince and...
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to be more anecdotal, probably. But you know, we work incredibly closely with a lot of our partners. So they take our CPUs, they incorporate that into a chip. You know, we work with them to ensure that they know how that technology is going to be treated under the export control regime. You know, we pass our classifications on to them, so we help try to...
So that's essentially assisting somebody who's using your chips in a product in the UK to help them get into an export market.
Exactly, okay. Exactly. So that would probably be the best example I could give. But there's both technical collaboration, but then also collaboration on you know, how they get that product to market
Chris,
as well.
Any equivalence with Rolls-Royce?
Well, I think clearly the primary way for smaller companies to get into export is via the route to market via Rolls-Royce in what we are exporting. And of course, we have a huge supply chain and work very closely with those partners. But I think there are other forums like the Defence Growth Partnership, the Aerospace Growth Partnership, which is a combination of large businesses and SMEs.
And do those organisations have an export at their core? Is that part of their DNA?
Yes, it is. But given the nature of the global markets on aerospace and defence, so I think there are perhaps a couple of examples, and we're part of both those. But it's back to this coordinated approach when you have to have a strategically targeted, focused areas where there's a large market globally, highly differentiated. They know there are areas we can make money. We know we can execute because we have the capability. And all the pieces of the jigsaw, as were being described by colleagues here, have to be then in place. And any one piece of the jigsaw that's missing can undermine then the success. And you know, we could have technology investment, we can have great diplomatic approach and cross-government support. You need all that to work well, and I'm back to the home market endorsement being critical, of course, in that piece.
The impact of that
jigsaw.
lesson isn't lost on us.
No, exactly.
And Dylan, your business has grown incredibly fast and very well in export markets, and you're no doubt incredibly busy managing your own business. But has there been any effort or initiative on the part of UK export authorities to say, hold on, there's a company here that's clearly doing things right and learning the lessons that you've gone through and passing those through to other exporters, or do you feel a little bit left alone?
Oh, certainly not. And I really would like to thank the trade advisors that we work with in the Department of International Trade. We've been incredibly fortunate to have a single advisor since our inception, who was largely responsible for the first introductions we made in China. So we've had an exceptional relationship there. And at the time, we would have been offered opportunities to speak, especially on that trade mission, to companies much larger than ourselves. And we certainly try and reciprocate that now.
Right. There is some team working.
Yeah, certainly. I think to some extent it's not always centrally developed. I think that we all go to these trade conferences or trade missions, or centrally coordinated, I should say, and we meet each other, and from there, whether it's a WhatsApp group or emails or the sharing of cards and further calls, we do try and help out one another. I think there could be a more coordinated approach to ensuring that the valuable information that all of our colleagues have, my colleagues to my right, that that passes down to everybody, and it's not just circumstantial whether or not you happen to speak to the right person at the right time.
Right. Would you say it's a bit hit and miss right now then?
I would say that it would be great to have a more coordinated approach, to have an opportunity for. I think there's always room for improvement. I couldn't say though that I've seen it perfectly done anywhere. And just back to the original question, I suppose fundamentally in our business, the growth of British dairy, the growth of the brand of British dairy is important to us, whether it's our business or not. I mentioned earlier that we're exporting to the United States. A large part of the ingredients that we use are not just, and I won't get into the details of dairy in too much detail, but we don't just use milk in its raw form, we use it byproducts. We have to use microfiltration and nanofiltration to land on whey protein, casein proteins. We have to land on pure lactose of infant grade quality. The only reason I share that is those products are not possible to manufacture without the manufacturing of cheese. That actually is how that's the byproduct. So we rely heavily on a strong export of British cheese, which isn't currently a division within our business, to grow our scale. So going back to the initial question, how do we help others? Have we helped others? And it's certainly anecdotal, but we've been very fortunate as an organisation to build an excellent product and build up some great distribution networks. It's very much in our interest that British dairy collectively succeeds internationally, not only in the United States, but all over the world, because it fundamentally, it's a raising.
There's enough being done to do that? I mean, can't be just your initiative alone. It needs to be a sector-led event.
Certainly, yeah, and the ADHB is a great organisation that we travel to Gulf Food with, and they do put partners in contact, and we try our best to make introductions for others, but certainly if it was more coordinated approach, more holistic, maybe we could grow faster.
It's helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Chris, let me just wrap up this panel just asking you about the UK export support strategy. So there's this grand figure of £1 trillion in exports by 2030. How does that show up at your business? I mean, do you get DBT officials saying, look, Chris, we've got this big target, we're a bit worried about how we hit it, we're a bit off track at the moment, what can we do together with you, you're one of our biggest exporters? How does the strategy meet the
honest answer is I'm not aware we do get that sort of communication, but we do get engagement, of course, on export opportunities, which must be part of that.
Do you ever get asked what you need in order to grow your exports faster?
Yes, we engage in that dialogue, and we'd communicate the sort of things I've communicated.
Well, knocks on your door and says, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you.
Exactly, yes. But I think on the government target, I can't comment on the specific steps to getting there, but the principles in the document issued we strongly agree with. We've benefited from some of the initiatives that are described within it. I personally see enormous opportunity across multiple industries for increasing our exports, particularly on some of the emerging clean tech and indeed nuclear capabilities. And so and we engage with government, across government, on those aspects that will try and increase the likelihood and success in maximising the benefit for the UK. And that's why this cross-government approach is so important, because we're up against some very powerful lobbies we find in markets from the US, very well coordinated lobbies from across the US government and France in particular, particularly in the defence world. And we're strong, but we need to make sure we keep at our very best so we don't get outgunned.
When we were in South Korea before Christmas, the committee heard loud and clear from the defence industry there that these shared platforms, like, for example, the Tempest programme that we have with Japan, are very important government-to-government platforms in pulling through exports. Yes. Are they more important than getting new FTAs signed? Should we be investing more in government-to-government platforms that pull through exports rather than...
I'm not sure which is most powerful, but I can confirm they are hugely important, the government-to-government arrangements in defence exports. And something like the GCAP programme, the Global Combat Air Programme, Italy, UK, Japan, will be immensely important in as opportunity for the UK in pulling through technology advancement, some of which will have benefit across into the civil domain as well. So it's there's a force multiplier effect there with the value of that technology. And so I do reinforce that government-to-government arrangements are hugely powerful in a number of domains. Yeah.
And Vince, I mean, the IMF says that we now have about 2,500 restrictions on trade introduced by governments per year. That's up about eightfold in the last 10 to 15 years. Economic security is now disrupting global trade in a way that it's not in the past. If we can't get trade deals signed with, say, the United States, is there a virtue in trying to get economic security arrangements that at least help us navigate some of the restrictions that you're beginning to bump into?
Yeah, absolutely. There are specific sorts of agreements within export control regimes that allow country-to-country collaboration. So that's an important mechanism. You know, I will say things like the CPTPP are incredibly important as well. I know that the report discussed the value of that from a financial perspective, but I will say creating norms across a geography that large is incredibly important. And the CPTPP was actually very forward-looking around digital trade. So as I mentioned earlier, we deliver everything digitally. We deliver IP by digital means, and so protecting cross-border data flows, preventing forced localization, protecting source code, those sorts of things that are enshrined in the CPTPP are incredibly important for us. The last thing I would say, I believe that was point 12, the made in the UK export to the world part of that report. Also touched a bit on the WTO. Obviously, the WTO is a bit dysfunctional. Incredible outcome at the end of last week to protect the digital tax moratorium, but it was only a 2-year extension. So, we're facing a lot of uncertainty about what 2 years from now looks like. It appears there's a lot of countries that want to see that moratorium go away, so the more the UK could do to support that, and the WTO would be incredibly important. I mean,
that's incredibly useful. And the European Commission has just launched an anti-subsidy investigation into EV cars from China, for example. I suspect that there are going to be more such anti-subsidy investigations soon. Yeah. The Trade Remedy Authority in the UK did not seek to join that anti-subsidy investigation for reasons we are not yet clear about. But I mean, is that going to become an important trade defence mechanism by actually taking a stronger stand against competitors that are enjoying subsidies which are frankly unfair?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I mean, one of the things that we talk about as a company is with all of these incentives that are being made into the semiconductor sector globally, there's a real concern about overcapacity, which obviously distorts the market. It impacts us because it drives down our royalty rates and our revenue and our ability to reinvest that revenue back into the next product. And so absolutely keeping those sorts of mechanisms alive and looking at the right issues is going to be absolutely important to us, because I think the next 5 to 6 years in the semiconductor industry, there's going to be a lot of change. And just like we're seeing in the EV market, allegedly, there could be a glut of semiconductor products coming from countries that over-incentivize their domestic industries.
Well, our time's up now. That has been an absolutely fascinating panel. Thank you so much. The committee is extremely grateful to you all for your evidence. You've told us a lot there about the importance of government-to-government platforms in driving through exports. You've told us a lot about the imperatives of economic security agreements and how we need to get a bit stronger on tackling subsidies from that unlevel the playing field. And this point about making sure that we've got industries with strong brands behind the industry is obviously super important too. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Order. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding